Hello everyone, my name is Wayne Jones. I'm the University Librarian here at Carleton, and I wanted to welcome you to the inaugural interview in our Tell Me About Yourself series. As you know, if you've seen the introductory video that we did, this is basically a way of not only me getting to know staff here in the library, but you getting to know, not necessarily in a personal way, but in a, what do people do in this department? What does Fred do? What does Sally do? I know we don't have a Fred here, we have a Sally, but not a Fred, but what do people do in the library? And the idea is not for it to be frivolous, but the idea is basically so that people could learn about what each person is doing in each department. So over the course of time, we hope to be doing this for every 2 weeks, and this is our first one. And the first person to be interviewed is a person who works in the systems department, someone you probably met, someone whose name you probably know, but you may not know the details of what he does here, and his name is Kevin Bowrin. So thanks for doing this, Kevin.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no problem. No, it's a good place to start, actually. Just to start, how long have you worked here at Carleton?
I've worked here full-time for 8 years, around 8 years, but I started here as a student before that. So
right.
Some closer to 10.
Right, exactly, okay. And how, I've got sort of 3 parts of the job that you do, and correct me if I'm wrong on this: programmer, web developer, and systems administrator. Now I'm not a systems person by any stretch of the imagination, but so maybe tell me a little bit, maybe not from the specifics right now, but a little bit about each of those. For example, programmer, what are you doing when you're programming here?
Sure, I have a project that kind of encapsulates all 3 of those roles. It would be a good thing to talk about. When we're doing the thesis processing, so we get theses submitted through Banner, through the central system to the library. The program that does that processing is something that I wrote. It runs on a server that I maintain and make sure that it's kept up to date. And it has a web interface that I designed so that staff could log into it. So programming scripts to do work, creating websites for patrons and for staff, and managing the servers where those programs run or where those websites are served from.
So the idea then is that for example, and again, I don't have that kind of technical knowledge. This stuff is not off the shelf. It's not as if you can grab it from somewhere and use it. This is stuff that needs to be sort of originally developed here, originally done here. That's the idea.
Exactly. Some of the things that we do are off the shelf. So the library website is based on a platform called Drupal, and that's not something that we've created. That's something that we are using. That's an open source collaborative community effort. But there are some things specifically based in the library that are specific to our needs, like the thesis processing, like the things that are going on with Aries in the background, things of that nature.
Right. So when people talk about, I often hear people referring to coding. We do coding and programming are equivalent things. When they're basically talking about a thing needs to be done, we know what the end result is, but a script or a program or code needs to be written in order to achieve that. Is that basically what the idea?
Exactly, yeah. A lot of what I've been focusing on is reducing human interaction on things, or the amount of work that a person would have to do to catalog something or to add something to a system. Right. So the thesis processing, it's on top of mind because I just did it a couple minutes ago. That process would have been a lot of typing information from a thesis into the library system. Now that's all done by the computer automatically. So right. All of the things that do that, those are things that I create.
Right. And are they often projects like that where, I would presume that things need to be fixed at certain points or updated, but generally speaking, once you've sort of done all that lead work in order to get it done, generally speaking, that would be sort of left as it is, and it should be sort of running something you'd watch, but it doesn't need to be attended to every 3 months or something.
We hope. That's the goal.
Right.
Some things I've been able to write, and they've been running happily since then with very little interaction with me. Some things do take a little more coaxing to get working. But yeah, that's the goal, is to try to be as efficient as possible.
Right. So the second one is web developer. Maybe people have a better idea of what that might mean, but maybe say a little bit about what not only what web development is, but how you practice it here.
Sure. So a good example would be the website that we created for this interview series.
Right.
It's based on Drupal, but the theme is something that we created in-house. I work with Shelley and work with Mike and a couple of other folks to make that look the way it is, act the way it does. So, for example, we knew that we wanted something that was easy and simple, but could be used on phones, could be used on tablets, and could be used on desktops. So one part of that job is ensuring that we design the website so that it could be used properly on all those different sizes of devices.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that takes a little bit of work, takes a little doing to get there. Another thing that happens with web design is choosing colors, choosing images. So some graphic design work also happens there. And then another important part of that job is making sure that the websites that we launch are AODA compliant, are able to be used by any one of our patrons. So that comes down to some technical stuff, but that also, some of the things that we do there to make sure that that's happening is the language simple enough, are links properly formatted, that sort of thing. So some of it is technical, but then some of it is also more artistic.
Right, design.
Yes, exactly.
It's not just about sort of coding a page and putting it up and you're all set to go, but you're creating an attractive, beautiful, useful site in the end. Right?
Yeah, yes.
That's part of it.
And that's part of the job that I really enjoy. Doing the technical work is, that's mainly what I do. So when I'm able to have a little fun with the design work, that's also a good time. Yeah.
How much opportunity do you get to do that here?
Quite a lot, actually, yeah. We're always launching new projects and new websites, so create a logo for this, create a website for that. That happens more than you think. Yeah.
Right. And how does that happen? Does it happen a department is doing something, or is it mostly all at a sort of a grander level of something that's related to our general website? But do you have, say, people from departments saying, I need this for a conference I'm attending, and then you need to create, does it work like that? Or is it mostly bigger macro projects?
For individual projects, that's usually brought forward by George, the old head of systems, now the AUL, for an individual project that we need a website for, or a collection that we're going to be incorporating, so we need a website to host it. But on the library website, their changes mostly go through the web committee. And for example, the subject guides were completely changed recently.
Right.
And that was a project that was worked through by the web committee and by Shelley. And Shelley and I designed how the new subject guide should look, what the spacing should be, what the font choices should be, how many tabs should there be, how many paragraphs should there be, that kind of thing.
Right.
So some things are done in a committee setting, some things are done just by Shelley and I working together, and some things are just me for some of the smaller one-off projects. And working with Shelley and the other members of the systems team has been really rewarding. They're a great group of people to work with.
Cool. That's half the battle. Yeah. I'm presuming too in web development that it's, again, I'm no expert at that either, but that there's sort of a balance between, you mentioned the creativity, for example, in design, but also there must be, obviously there are industry standards about certain things, not only the stuff like the AODA stuff that you're mentioning, but certain things that one does on websites now that are standard practice and that it's probably not a good idea to go against.
We actually need to rein people in sometimes. Proposals come through web committee to do things that would make the website less usable for patrons and for their staff members. And there's always that push and pull where you want to be doing really interesting things, but sometimes those really interesting things aren't appreciated by the people who actually need to get at the information or get at the data or get at the files that you're trying to serve to them.
Right.
And some of those things break. We are all familiar with websites that looked really flashy when they launched, but they become old-fashioned rather quickly, and technologies change too quickly to really dive into them. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant website with a big flash thing in the middle that's playing music and doing a bunch of fancy things, sometimes you just want to know what the address of the restaurant is. So there is that push and pull where you want to do the cool, new, interesting thing, but you also need to follow the standards. You need to make your website look like other websites and do what other websites do, because you want patrons to be able to use it quickly and efficiently. So.
For sure. I presume also there's some parts of the design elements like that too, right? There's design that's whatever, appealing or useful or attractive right now, but over time, there are certain styles or certain things that are a good idea today, but a year and a half from now, maybe not so much.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. The push that we had with the interview site, for example, we wanted it to be as simple and clean as possible, but we could have made it really crazy with lots of zooms and lots of pull quotes and animations and things. And the web is an exciting place right now because those things are possible. You can do, and there are some experiments and some projects using 3D video on the web, or 3D music videos, or interactive exhibits, or articles that use data visualization in a really interesting way. The challenge there is that as a library, we have to maintain things over the long term and in an archival friendly way. So sometimes those new web technologies become stagnant or become depreciated really quickly. So you have to be careful what you're doing.
Right. I'm hoping that on the future revision of the interview web page, we can bring back the classic from the 90s, which was the flashing letters.
Oh, yeah.
It's really appealing these days.
The marquee going across.
Exactly.
Yeah. I also wanted to add the GIF of the guy digging, saying web page under construction. Everybody loves it. We should bring it back.
It's bringing a tear to my eye. That's a good one. And the other part, so the third part was systems administrator. Again, that's something that I have an idea of what that might be, but say a little bit about what that means here in your job at Carleton.
Sure. So we ensure that the servers that are running the services that we offer locally here are kept up to date, are have the latest features that the maintainers of that software offsite are added here. Security features or security patches that come down, making sure those are applied, making sure that we're not susceptible to attacks that have been fixed by other people. And that process is a lot of trying things and testing things and making sure they're working properly before we push them out to all the systems that we maintain. And the challenge of that is making sure that you're not affecting patrons, applying upgrades when there's which might create downtime, those sort of things.
Right.
So that's more of the plumbing, the mechanics of what I do is making sure that everything is up to date, making sure that all the patches have been applied, and that those additions are not affecting patrons and staff.
So when you say that too about patches applied and up to date and all that, what you're talking about is systems that are maintained here in the systems department of the library. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's an IT department on campus for the university as well. So, but we have unique servers or applications or sites or whatever here that's what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. So next to our offices and systems, we have a server room that physically houses the machines that run the library website and a bunch of other services. Mm-hmm. And someone needs to ensure that those hardware that hardware is kept up to date, and the services that are running on that hardware are kept up to date. So that's part of what we do.
How much in the course of whatever, in any of those jobs that you do, are you working with or consulting with the folks in ITS in the university? Is it a kind of a rarity for that to happen, or is that a pretty standard part of your work?
Depends on the level of integration. So for some things that we house here locally that have very little interaction with the ITS systems, the website, for example, we can bring it down, bring it back up, do the updates that we need to do without impacting, without ever having to talk to any of their systems. So that's pretty hands-off. During the recent renovations in the server room, there was a lot of discussion with ITS because that space will now be shared between ITS and systems. So we needed to make sure that everything was compatible, to make sure that the work that they were doing wasn't going to be impacting our work and vice versa. But then there are systems like Aries, the course reserve system, that are housed in ITS and not here locally.
Right.
And those are using systems like Moodle and Banner quite heavily to bring in data, to move users from one to the next. And in those cases, we have to communicate and be working collaboratively very closely with ITS to make sure that everything is working smoothly.
Right.
So it really depends on the project.
If I can go back a little bit, and I want to come and talk a little bit more about projects and that sort of thing as well, just to give people kind of more of a taste of that sort of thing rather than in addition to the technical stuff. But
sure.
How did you come? You said you've been here for 8 years as an employee.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you come? What kind of training did you come with? What kind of certification did you come with, or is it? I guess, learning on the job as well?
So I got a undergraduate computer science, bachelor of computer science from Carleton, and that was a really good foundation for the work and the additional training that I got on top of that. But honestly, a lot of the learning happens as you're doing it on site. Learning from Rob, learning from Dalton, learning from Mark, and trying things out and working through problems yourself. That's been the best way for me to learn how to do these things.
Right.
Another challenge is that this space moves so quickly, the technology changes so quickly, that if I had gotten the certification 5 years ago in something, it'd be unlikely that we would be using it now. So a lot of self-directed learning, a lot of learning as you go, a lot of learning on the job.
Yeah. And apart from self-directed learning and sort of keeping up in general terms, is there, as part of your job, like a recertification process in any kind of thing that happens, or is that not applicable now?
There could be. The library could choose to make sure that I have a certification in this or that. For example, if you're putting in the networking hardware and the switches and the cables and things like that throughout the library, it's helpful to have a certification in that to know that you're doing it properly, because if that doesn't go well, it's a physical thing that needs to then be changed, and that's very expensive. But for the position that I'm working in now, we haven't seen a need to get a level of certification in this or a certification in that. So,
some people I talk to informally at the library, and applies to my own life as well. Like when I went to university to study whatever, I had a kind of a vague idea of where I might end up, and this took various turns, and I think a lot of people are like that. When you were doing a computer science degree here at Carleton, did you have a pretty, perhaps you didn't imagine actually working in the library at Carleton, but did you have a pretty good idea about what you wanted to be doing when you sat down at the chair every day?
Not particularly. I always thought that I may in future move into a startup. That idea of a small office of people working, 60-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks, and doing something transformative was always sort of a goal that I had in mind. But I worked as a summer student the year before I started working at Carleton full-time in a community house here in Ottawa. I purchased computer hardware, got it all set up, and that gave members of that community internet access where they didn't have before, either because they didn't have an internet connection at home or they didn't have a computer at home. So there was a lot of new immigrant families that were able to communicate with friends and family back home because of that. So I always liked the idea of doing something for the public good instead of just going and working at IBM to make a better mousetrap. And working in the library has helped me do that. So helping patrons with their research needs, with access, helping staff reduce the amount of time they're spending copying and pasting things. I like the idea of solving real problems. So getting the opportunity to work in the library has really fit that very, very well.
It's good to hear you say that too, and not surprising, I might say, because I hear a lot of that from people. My background, for example, is in technical services, and one of the things I like about working in a library, even in the position I'm in now, is because you sort of support the mission, and it's good to hear you say about that it's not as if you're sort of squirreled away in a back room and you're doing something that involves a bunch of numbers that are not going to affect anyone. That it's a student service sort of thing that you're doing.
Yep.
You're maybe a few steps back from you are a few steps back from, say, the person who's actually at an info desk, but it's to the same end, to the same purpose.
Definitely. Yeah. Joanne in Reserves talks about this a lot. Carleton is moving more and more in the direction of distance learning, using the web to reach out to more and more people. And I believe the library website and the proxy server behind which we serve our resources is way more heavily used than the physical building is. So that's really important to us as a department to ensure that we're doing a good job, because we, to many people, are the face of the library, people who aren't able to come on campus or learn in different ways. So.
Yeah, no, very important. I know when we do things like metrics, we very routinely here do our gate counts of people coming in the door, but there's many more people who are coming in through the web door, right?
Yeah.
That's really very important, obviously, to give you an idea. I just want to step back now and talk a couple of things. One is, you mentioned a couple other projects that you've been working on. Perhaps you could talk about, not necessarily from the lens of system administrator or whatever, but a few other projects that you've worked on here that either you've enjoyed or been particularly important or particularly difficult, particularly frustrating, maybe one or two of those.
Sure. The Aries integration was a big one. So getting Aries up and running, getting it talking to Moodle, getting it talking to Banner, that was a big learning curve, and it was a lot of hard, heavy lifting to get it to where it is now. But that system helps patrons quite a lot. It's heavily used, and it allowed the reserve staff to be much more efficient in what they were doing. So that was a lot of work, but it was really well worth the work. Another one was the library website redesign that we did quite a long time ago now. Mm-hmm. When that was happening, again, we had to balance what we did before on the web, how the new website was going to be designed, that sort of thing. Getting that up and running with Anthony, who now works at Ottawa U. That was a process that we had to collaborate more with staff in the library to get it working so that everybody was happy with it. And I think the most difficult one in terms of implementation time was Curve, getting our institutional repository where it is now. I think it's at version 2 or 3 that we've been working through, and making that work the way it's working now. As a person who doesn't have a library sciences background, learning the ropes and learning how these things are used by other universities and other libraries, the research that went behind it, that was the one that took the most sitting down and working time. And I think it's been a pretty successful project.
Yeah, so. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned actually in passing a couple of times, but I asked you about sort of working with the ITS folks on campus, but you've even referred to it just in these projects about, again, it's not as if someone puts a sheet of paper on your desk and say, have this thing done in 5 weeks' time. You're working with the head of access services or folks probably in cataloging your acquisitions. That's probably, is that a typical part of, or most of the sort of the assignments that you get along the lines of something you work on independently, or are you backing and forthing with departments and stuff?
A lot of collaboration, yeah. Sometimes there are projects that come down that we are talking with external stakeholders a lot more. So in the past, recently there have been some federal libraries that have closed down and some federally funded projects that have wrapped up, and those collections and the websites for those projects we've taken on as part of our collections here. So in those cases, working with external folks was really important. Working with the folks at StatsCan for the TLI collection was an important one.
Right.
And yeah, working with staff here closely with the cataloging team, with the reserves team, to provide them with a service that would actually work for them was really, really important. So yeah, lots of meetings, lots of talking, lots of collaboration. But we haven't relied on a very formal, here's a requirements document that's 15 pages long. A lot of it was talking with them, implementing something, giving it back to them, seeing what they think, taking those changes, iterating. So less of a upfront big design and more of a iterative collaborative process, which has worked really well for us.
Right. And I presume, again, I will put the caveat of I'm not a technical person in that sort of sense, that there's an advantage of that because the end product you end up with for that department say will be much better if you're consulting people along the way or collaborating with people along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about however you term it, professional development, or even just along the lines of things not necessarily affiliated with Carleton, but that you're interested in the IT or the systems field, or whatever? What are some of your particular areas there that are particularly appealing to you?
Sure. There's a language developed by Rob Pike and a couple of folks who work at Google now, called Go, and I've been learning that. It wasn't something that we were taught in university because it's a language that is newer than my university degree. But that's been really interesting because it's a new programming language. A lot of people to it are new to it, so it's not like moving into an old guard of people who know everything and do it this way. That community especially feels like something that from the ground up was very inclusive and wanted you to learn and wanted to teach you how to use those tools. So that's been great. I've been writing a lot of the recent things that I've been doing in Go, and that's been super productive. Another thing a project that I've been working on the side is a data analysis out of the OC Transpo data. So OC Transpo provides an API for their buses to say, your bus is coming in a minute, your bus is coming in 5 minutes. And there's a caveat in their agreement when you sign up to use that data that you can't store all that information in bulk and analyze it, because it would open up OC Transpo to having to answer questions that maybe they don't want to have to answer. So I've been interested in using that data and not breaking that agreement, but still providing the public with a way of rating and analyzing the bus service or the transit service that they're being provided. So is it just your imagination that your bus is always 10 minutes late, or is your bus really always 10 minutes late? And OC Transpo should look at that. It's a kind of level of detail that they haven't provided to the public yet, and I would love to be able to analyze that and to do it in a way that is fun and is using mapping and is using analysis of the socioeconomic status of the people in the different neighborhoods and whether they're being served properly and that sort of thing.
Right.
So that's a project that I've been thinking about for a long time and just recently started working on more seriously.
And when you think of it as a project, do you mean something that you could just publicly give at some point, if you know what I mean, like something that not just for the privacy of your own entertainment, but something that would be useful to people?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's the idea, right? The other thing I'm interested in is about how you got here as well. You were mentioned about being at Carleton for 8 years at working here, and you mentioned being a student here as well. Where did you come from? Where were you born, and how did you get here?
Sure. My family is from Richmond, Ontario, which is just outside, or it's technically in Ottawa, but just right at the border. And when I was coming up through high school, I asked my parents, all right, so what, should I do this or should I do that? And I either wanted to go into journalism or go into computer science. And they said, no, go with the computer science, because you might actually get a job doing that.
Very practical.
And they were very, very practical. So I went into computer science here at Carleton, and from there learned about a job posting in the library and applied for it and got it, and really just snowballed from there. But yeah, always had an interest in my dad always had a computer in the house, so I would be playing with that and writing games for it and doing things on that. So there was always an interest there. Yeah.
Very cool. Kevin, thanks very much for being our first interviewee. I appreciate your being so open with the information, and I think I have a better idea now of what you do and how you got here. And again, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me.